I want to thank everybody for coming. This is going to be a great talk with a lot of wonderful reality. If you get a chance, there's a lovely axe out there from the Bronze Age and some other interesting pieces of realia. This CD here, I listened to it the other day. This is excellent, this CD here. Very, very pleasant recording. And there's also some books here for sale. And I also have a list of Georgian reading materials that we have in the collection, if you're interested in checking any out. And I just want to introduce Redjeb Jordania, his new book is All My Georges. Okay.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you, everybody here, many friends and many people who I'm pleased to see here for the first time. First of all, I'd like to mention that in our assembly, even though Georgia is a little country far away, we have quite a few people who have been to Georgia, and more than one, some of them, and some even have been to Georgia with me as far back as 1991 as a Don Taylor over there. And I see Anne Wooden here, whose son lives in Georgia, is married to a Georgian, and he has been there for quite a few years, and Anne has been to Georgia many times. Of course, Peggy here, who has been with me quite a few times, Marilyn with me, and interesting idiosyncrasies of the Georgians. and my old friend Doug, Harvey, and Carol. Doug went, only one among us, I think, went trekking in the mountains of Georgia last August, meeting with snowfalls, snow blindness, and all kinds of interesting things like that. Carol very sensibly stayed in the city. So, to begin with, I would like to remind everybody that August 1912, which is in 3 days, is the 4th anniversary of the Russo-Georgian War of 2008. And many of you know it already. It, of course, affected me personally very much. When the war was announced, my first thought was, once again. Because if I'm here, it is because in 1921, the Red Army invaded independent Georgia, and my parents, my father, and many other Georgians, my father was at the time the president of the Independent Republic of Georgia, were obliged, of course, to go into exile, which happened to be in Paris in those times. Remember, in 1921, Paris, in 1920, Paris was the center of the so-called diplomatic universe. That's where the Treaty of Versailles was signed, many other treaties, and in the First World War. And I was born shortly thereafter. And right now, in 2008, my daughter, my American daughter, was in Georgia. She married to a Georgian, and they were in New York for many years. And then just a few months before, in March, they went back to Georgia, where my son-in-law was named at the time Minister of Health and Social Affairs, which means he was right in the middle of dealing with that crisis. So I'd like to remind briefly everybody about this 2008 event. Here is a map of Georgia. Now, the little Georgia is not very big. From end to end, it measures, let's say, about 240 miles. From the capital, which is so-called Tbilisi, to the Black Sea is about 150 miles. And the largest width over there is about 110 miles. You can see it's not very big. But before we go into that, I'd like to say, now, who are those Georgians? Who are they? Well, if you ask them themselves, they say, first, we were here first. Second, they are very hospitable, and they have been characterized as too much is not enough. And the third thing, if you get 3 Georgians together, you end up with 5 political parties. Which is why right now there is one party in power in Georgia, and the opposition, splinter of parties, I don't even know how many. Some say they finally consolidated into only 28 parties. Only. So, and what do they think about Georgia proper? Well, that's what the Georgians say about Georgia. One day, all the nations were squabbling about their territories. So they decided to ask God to attribute territories to each of them so the squabbling would stop. So God did that. He attributed territory at this time here and there to every different group. But the Georgians were not there. They arrived late. And God said, I have nothing left for you. You arrived late, so you don't get anything. Oh God, they say, we have been so busy drinking to your health and having a good time in your honor that's why we are late. And God said, oh well, in that case, I kept a little piece of land for myself. I'll give it to you. And indeed, it's God's land. Now, do you think it's only an anecdote? In the Atlanta Olympics, which were about 10 years ago, more or less. Anyhow, there was a Georgian delegation. The only real hope for any kind of medal was with a weightlifter. And so what happened? The day of the competition, the Georgian weightlifter were late. Why? Because they were too busy having a good time the night before, so they didn't wake up in time. So another one. So, now, I'd like to go back, and before I continue also, now, do we know some Georgians? Yes. I think everybody knows some Georgian, famous and infamous. Closer to us in America, not under President Clinton, you had a chief of staff, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, that was Saakashvili. General Saakashvili is a Georgian born in Poland who immigrated here when he was very young, and he was a Georgian of both parents. His parents lived in Poland because they also immigrated from Georgia after the Soviet takeover. Another famous Georgian that most everybody knows is Balanchine. Balanchine, his real name is Balanchivadze, but he recited it to name Balanchine, and he's Georgian. Another Georgian that some might know, but with the older generation, remember the musical Kismet? The musical Kismet was shamelessly, the music was shamelessly stolen by Jerome Kern or somebody. It's really the music of Borodin, completely, absolutely, not per note. In those times, this music was not covered by copyright here, and therefore they grabbed it. And Balanchine, Borodin is an illegitimate son of a Georgian nobleman who gave him the name of one of his servants. So, and of course, among the infamous ones, everybody knows Stalin, and even worse, Beria. So that's for Georgian, well, known about. Now, of course, they are much more interesting in Georgian, including my father, but they are not so well known, and no wonder why. So, now coming back to this, to this 2008 war. You see, I marked here in black South Ossetia. It looks relatively big, relatively to the size of Georgia, but it's very misleading. Georgia is very mountainous. So in all this big thing, it's only a few valleys which are inhabited. And at the time of the war, there were some 50,000 Ossetians there, and some 30,000 Georgians altogether in that area. And South Ossetia was, and officially still is, part of the Georgian Federation, they call it. The other part, which is on the northwest part of the Abkhazia, is again also what they call the runaway republic. Now these were under the Soviet system. There was the Georgian Federation, which included the Georgia proper, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and Adjar. But Abkhazia was around a long time, ever since the Middle Ages or before. But South Ossetia is a very recent proposition. It was given the name of South Ossetia and accorded autonomy by Stalin in 1922. And Ossetians arrived around there only about 100 years ago, which, given the long history of Georgia, is just yesterday. And so there we are. That was the situation. And South Ossetia, and both South Ossetia and Abkhazia kind of wanted to separate from Georgia after the split of the Soviet Union. So I won't go into all the details. It's simply that at that time, in 2008, there was a number of incidents which led to that war. And on the face of it, many people think that Georgia is the one who gave the pretext to attack, which might be right. But the truth of the matter, as you remember, is as soon as Kosovo was recognized as independent, Putin declared very openly, if you recognize Kosovo, I will recognize South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And that's what in effect happened really. So this is the situation there. That was 4 years ago. From about 30,000 Georgians were expelled from South Ossetia. They were refugees in Georgia. Now, in that respect, I must say that it seems to me, I'm no expert of course, it seems to me that the Georgians dealt with the refugees, 30,000, a lot better than Americans dealt with the refugee from Katrina. Remember, most of them were lodged in famous trailers, but 1 year later I was over there and I saw villages after villages of small houses, not so small, maybe 1,000 square feet each, with all the amenities, with sewer, kitchen, etc., which were built specifically for refugees in the area. So, it seems to me it was better. Now so my daughter, of course, and my son-in-law were in Georgia at the time. I remember communicating by email, and they were almost ready to run away, to go towards Armenia, etc., because there was no physical force to stop the Russians to take the capital, which was about 2 hours drive away by tank, not very fast. So it didn't happen, because fortunately, now the world took notice. Briefly, Georgia was first taken over by the Tsarist Empire at the beginning of the 19th century. And at the time, nobody even noticed. Then, in 1921,